Now let's take a look at this figure 14-12, and it deals with slip. And a motor, the rotor will always have a certain amount of slip. Sometimes it's 5%, whatever, the manufacturer designs with the amount of slip the motor has. Kind of picture it this way. If you had a guy running and you were 5 steps behind that person all the time, there's no way you could catch him or her. You're always 5 steps behind. That could be like your 5% slip. But if you caught her or him and you're running side by side, there is no slip. You're right there with them. There's no steps behind. You're right there with them. And the only time I've ever seen a motor really do that was a synchronous motor. It's listed in table 430.52. And you start it different ways, and once it comes up to a certain speed, you pop it with DC, that rotor, and then it will run at synchronous speed. You can lag it, you can lead, you can do many things with that old synchronous type motor. But when that motor gave problems, or the equipment associated with it, it would really separate the men from the boys and the girls from the girls if you were troubleshooting, I'll tell you for sure. Now, looking at this, you're going to have the field poles, south and north. You're going to have your rotor. You're going to have your rotating field, and south and north poles produces your flux, and notice the motor rotates through it. And you have your lines of force. EMF produced by the motor cutting the magnetic lines of force. EMF is electronic motive force. I'm sorry, tongue-tied there for a minute. And the rotor is pushed and pulled by the field poles. Now, this is what we're saying. So now you see this south pole on the rotor. It's pulling it into the north pole of the pole there. And just as it gets to this north pole, the electricity electrifying your poles will change that pole to south, and it pushes it out. As we've seen in previous illustrations in this chapter 14 of Stallcup's generator, transformer, motor, compressor book. And then notice again, the rotor then is going to be pulled by the south pole and north pole, and then when it gets up here, the rotor, this changes to a north, and when you come in, it just keeps pushing and pulling it through there, see? And that's what this illustration is showing. But notice it's designed with a slip. In other words, it never catches the magnetic field, the maximum flux that field produces. It's always running 5% behind that, see? And if you wanted more calculation procedures showing you how that's developed and all that kind of thing, and the different slips of motors, well, purchase the book. And you can get into more detail. In fact, you can study all you want to study. And if you're an electrician and you do deal with generators, transformers, motors, and compressors, or maybe just 2 of them, you deal with transformers and motors. Or maybe transformers, motors, and compressors. No, just motors and compressors. You have everything in there you want. Troubleshooting, connecting controls, everything is there and what you're supposed to do. And it all matches up to what you would actually do out in the field. So if you're interested in that, fine. If you're not, that's okay too. But this figure 14-12 is just illustrating that motors with that, the only ones I've seen was synchronous, that would actually run at synchronous speed. You always have a slip, and they'll never cut through those magnetic fields even. Why? Because if you got up there, it no longer have any power. If it was turning right with that magnetic field, you wouldn't have any power. So they have a slip behind it to determine the amount of speed that they want the motor to turn at and the type of torque the motor they want by cutting into the rotor and setting bars that go across there and short out so that it will have different torque values based upon design B, C, or D. And this illustration is just illustrating in 14-12 that motors will have slip and never cut through the magnetic field at the magnetic power force of the field.